People have postulated for centuries as to why the Roman Empire eventually collapsed. With weak leadership, economic turmoil, overexpansion, and the development of significant threats in the form of their military rivals often being cited. However, me being the massive nerd that I am, have pondered a different question. Why is it that Rome eventually became Christian? And why was their old mythology no longer working for them? Well, that's because Roman mythology kinda sucks. By the time the exploits of JC reached the ears of your average Roman citizen, the entire institution was wrought with cults, local deity worship, and an official pantheon which was so overstuffed with syncretism, no one really knew what to believe in anymore anyway. Factor in the martyrdom of the persecuted Christians and the official adaptation of the faith by Constantine the Great, and it really did spell doom for the old Roman myths. However, there's another problem which I think played a really big role in all of this, and that was the process by which deceased despots would ascend to godhood following their deaths. Sometimes this worked really well, like when you actually had a popular emperor like Augustus, and other times you've got Drusilla, who wasn't even an emperor, but her incestuous man-child of a little brother was. So, with people not even being able to agree on who was actually emperor at any given moment, let alone who should be considered a good god following their death, this led to the same issue I had previously mentioned of the mythology getting overstuffed with historical figures, and so the monotheistic religion from out of town started to seem more and more attractive as time went on. The lesson we can glean from all of this is obvious. Keeping deification to a minimum is good for both checking egos and to make sure that there aren't too many cooks to spoil the metaphorical broth. But what if you actually have some evidence, circumstantial as it may be, to back up your claim? What if there was a king so tyrannical and terrifying that his legacy as a merciless warlord supersedes him in death, and so all of his subjects are forced to worship him anyway? Well, Shango is an interesting character to study, as we have an attested historical, keep in mind the sources of which we have are highly contentious, figure with a pretty nasty reputation. Being an Alafin, roughly equivalent to a king, of the Oyo people, Shango ruled with an iron fist, and whenever people would speak out against him, he ordered for them to be immediately put to death. As bad as he was to live under, Shango was ultimately good for the Oyo nation as a whole, seeking to conquer new lands and expand his empire. However, as a sub-Saharan African, Shango had pitifully little physical resources to do so. With one pretty noticeable exception. Born during a massive thunderstorm which shook heaven and earth, Shango's father knew the moment his second son was born that he was dangerous, and so gave him the name Shango, which derives from the words Shan, meaning to strike with killing intent, and Go, meaning bewildering. Taking his name a little too literally, Shango, upon taking the throne, started experimenting with black magic, finding that he had quite the affinity for controlling the weather. More specifically, summoning thunderstorms. However, before he could fully master this technique and sufficiently bulldoze through most of the continent, Shango accidentally summoned a bolt of lightning which struck his estate and burned it to the ground, killing his 3 wives and several of his children. After abdicating his throne, Shango went on a bit of a journey of self-discovery, looking for a way to alleviate himself of his sins and maybe, just maybe, be able to return to his people as a better Oh, well, never mind then. I suppose just offing yourself is yet another option. However, something a bit strange began to happen after his death. So, the political opponents of Shango, now free to speak their minds about the cruel despot on account of him no longer being Alfin, and, you know, that whole making yourself an ornament on the Christmas tree fiasco, started just ragging on my boy, telling anyone who would listen about just how cruel Shango was as a ruler, and that they should feel glad that he was dead. Only for these very same people to be conveniently sniped with a lightning bolt soon afterwards. Now, James Bond once famously said, "Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence. But if something happens 3 times, it's intentional." And given the fact that if you don't read into this with a speculative eye, Shango was not only born during a thunderstorm, his house was burned down in a thunderstorm, and all of his enemies were smitten in a thunderstorm post-mortem. What should that tell you? Fearing for their lives, the Yoruba people quickly adopted Shango into their pantheon of deities, which is unique for 2 reasons. One, usually when a king dies, he is only deified by his subjects if he was remembered fondly and considered worthy of ascending and taking his place amongst the gods. In Shango's case, however, he was so Shango Unchained that people were literally pissing themselves at the thought of incurring Shango's wrath. And so, I did the math. The odds of some regular Joe getting struck by lightning in their lifetime are 1 in 15,300. The odds that multiple people are struck by lightning conveniently after talking shit about a tyrant who is known for his supernatural ability to control lightning is... yeah, you know what? Better start praying. The second reason as to why Shango's deification is unique is because he inherited the role of the Thunder God, literally one of the most elemental and fantastic parts of nature, the reverence of which is usually reserved for some big-hitting names such as Thor, Zeus, or Perun. You're not about to convince me that somehow the Yoruba people didn't have a god of thunder prior to Shango's comparatively recent death. Meaning that as soon as this guy died, either he called in a lot of favors from whoever the hell was hulking those things down to earth, or he actually strong-armed himself into that position, superseding what is possibly centuries of tradition, all because he heard you was talking shit. Now, later on, Shango was sometimes depicted with the head of a ram, which you might think is an insult, but it was actually meant to be taken as a depiction of Shango's responsibility as the god of male vitality. Which means that this motherfucker scared the shit out of his own people so much that it is now considered canon that he not only has the biggest penis of any man who ever lived, but he is also the reason as to why you can't get it up. Fuck it. This guy is my new favorite god of lightning. All hail Shango! All hail the Thundercock! Jesus Christ. Now, it should be stated that in later years, Shango has taken on a bit of a new light, as following the civil war of the Oyo Empire, the victors not only had their god of war to thank for letting them take back their home for themselves, but also for their freedom, as the captive warriors of the other side were then sold into the Atlantic slave trade, where they primarily found themselves in Brazil. A few years later, though, a few of the ancestors of these slaves thought it would be a great idea to start venerating the same god which allowed for them to be sold into slavery in the first place, hoping that he would summon a thunderstorm to kill their oppressors and free them from their enslavement. Yeah, that never happened. Left to assume that either Shango abandoned these people, or Brazil is the one place on Earth that even a god wouldn't dare to go. And that was Shango, a man who literally went from the most powerful figure of the Oyo people, humbled by his own hubris to the point where he was swallowed by despair, content to dying in obscurity, only to hear some assholes drag his name through the mud to the point where he literally slaps a god off his throne and then assumes it for himself because he is literally that petty. And that is why I love him. There you are, Shango. Take a seat alongside some of my other favorite divine figures at the Messiahs of Mythology Last Supper, drawn by our excellent channel artist, Dad Art Guy, aka Artist for Myths. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Dr. Plague for that new amazing animated intro, as well as the patrons who fund this crazy shit. If you were impressed with the improvements that we've made thus far to the branding of this channel, why not head over to the Patreon link down below and contribute what you can so that we can gradually keep improving from there. Or if you're really new here, but like what you saw anyway, be sure to subscribe for more videos as soon as they come out. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, my name is Messiahs of Mythology, and I hope you all have a God's blessed day.